Hey, last time we finished our survey of the triangles formed by the centers based on one's level of consciousness, then learned that though the fire may be centered in some one particular triangle, other triangles may also be active. It's my theory that there's a primary triangle and that the triangle that represented your stage of consciousness before that triangle came into activity is fading out, and the triangle that you're about to come into is gradually coming in. So you really have three triangles going, but the primary triangle being the one that represents your stage of consciousness at that time. DK then describes the progression of fiery activity within a center until eventually, quote, the center not only rotates in a specific direction, but literally turns upon itself, forming a living, flaming, iridescent globe of pure fire, and holding within it a certain geometrical shape, yet withal vibrating so rapidly that the eye can scarcely follow it. In the final stages, this progressive activity leads to a flame of fire emerging from the central lotus at the top of the head, which is, quote, the basic hue of a man's ray. So, this ray influence even affects the colors of the chakras and how they demonstrate. This flame mounts upward and seems to attract and draw downward a sheet of electric fire, which is a downflow from spirit. This marks the blending of the fires and the deliverance of man from the trammels of matter. So we're talking a very high level here, fourth initiation kinds of stuff. We then took up study of the same 5 symbols that we previously applied to the spheres of matter, this time applying them to the unfolding activity of each chakra. Same symbols, different application. Using quotes from Leadbeater's The Chakras, we learned that the circle represents the least developed chakric activity. Quote, when quite undeveloped, the chakras appear as small circles about 2 inches in diameter, glowing dully in the ordinary man. When a point of glowing fire appears at the center of the circle, the chakra begins to rotate more rapidly, marking, at least when appearing in the head chakra, a phase of early mental development. At the stage represented by a circle divided by a horizontal line, the motion in the chakra is much accelerated, and, quote, the dividing flame in the vortex shoots back and forth, stimulating the glow of the center itself till a much greater point of radiance is achieved. So we'll start this session by rereading the passage we were in the middle of last time called The Circle Divided into 4. Could we get a reader, please?
Yeah, Gordon, do you want to read?
Yes. Circle divided into 4. We come now to the point where the center is exceedingly active, with the cross within its periphery rotating as well as the wheel itself, and causing an effect of great beauty and activity. The man has reached a stage of very high development mentally, corresponding to the 5th root race, or to the 5th round in the larger cycle. He is conscious of 2 activities within himself, symbolized by the rotating wheel and the inner rotating cross. He is sensing the spiritual, though actively functioning in the personal life. And the development has reached a point wherein he is nearing the probationary path.
Thank you, Gordon. Okay, so first up, the circle divided into four. We come now to the point where the center is exceedingly active, with a cross within its periphery rotating as well as the wheel itself, and causing an effect of great beauty and activity. So at this point, we have a number of interrelated but distinctive influences on a given chakra. First, the heat and light of the central point glows in intensity. Second, both the circle and the cross increase their rotational speed. And third, the undulating activity of the petals or spokes becomes more active. Again, Leadbeater gives us more detail. Could we get a reader, please? We read this last week, but it was at the very end and sort of out of context. So let's take a look at it again. Reader, please.
And Veronica, you want to read?
Hello.
Hi.
Each of the secondary forces which sweep round the saucer-like depression has its own characteristic wavelength, just as has light of a certain color. But instead of moving in a straight line as light does, it moves along relative large undulations of various sizes, each of which is some multiple of the smaller wavelengths within it. The number of undulation is determined by the number of spokes in the wheel, and the secondary force weaves itself under and over the radiating current of the primary force, just as a basket work might be woven round the spokes of a carriage wheel. The wavelengths are infinitesimal, and probably thousands of them are included within one of the undulations. As the forces rush round in the vortex, these oscillations of different sizes crossing one another in this basket-work fashion produce the flower-like form to which I have referred. It is perhaps still more like the appearance of certain saucers or shallow vases of wavy iridescent glass, such as are made in Venus. All of these undulations or petals have that shimmering Pavonian effect like mother of pearl, yet each of them has usually its own predominant color, as will be seen from our illustrations. The nacreous silvery aspect is likened in Sanskrit work to the gleam of moonlight on water.
Thanks, Veronica. So, Leadbeater is really unique in his description of the chakras because he sees them with his inner eye and describes what he sees. It's not a theoretical, intellectual approach or understanding. He literally describes what he's seeing with the inner eye, which is quite different than many other sources on what the chakras look like and how they act. Just realized that my camera is all screwed up here. There we go. So I want to encourage you again to step up with any thoughts or questions at any point. The illustration shown here is from chakrakeyacademy.com, and it's based on a crop circle that appeared in the UK in 2009. The illustration is accompanied by the following text, which I think is interesting enough to read. And you might, if you're interested in this, what they have to say here, you could go to their website and just poke around a little bit, see what you can find. Could we get a reader, please? So they're calling this crop circle chakra synergy. That's the name they've put to it. So go ahead.
Janet, you want to read?
Sure. Chakra synastry is the reproduction of a 370-foot long crop circle found sculpted into a field of barley on May 25th, 2009, near Windham Hill in the UK. This amazing symbol illustrates the energetic design of the human spiritual being. The symbol clearly illustrates the 7 energetic centers of the chakra system, divided into 3 interconnected systems. The upper and the lower yin-yang symbols illustrate the directional movement of the upper and lower chakras. The large ring around the heart chakra, including the energetic lines and aura, gives us new information about how the heart receives frequencies from the upper and lower chakras. The large energetic ring is an energetic crucible designed to weigh the matters at hand, expressing the dominant energy from the heart center chakra.
Thank you. Yeah, so, if you're interested, chakrakeyacademy.com. Okay, next up. The man has reached a stage of very high development mentally, corresponding to the 5th root race, or the 5th round in the larger cycle. We're talking about that symbol which has the circle and the cross and represents these 2 activities of the revolution of both the outer wheel as well separately the inner cross. The statement suggests the chakra activity of one who has become mentally polarized, a stage which only a relatively small percentage of humanity has currently reached, but which will be increasingly seen as we approach the end of the 5th subrace of this 5th Aryan root race. There is obviously a huge difference between these 2 stages. Since one represents Atlantean and the other the high watermark of Aryan consciousness. One of the questions that came up to me as I was going through this is these symbols represent chakric activity within each of us, within a human being. But it seems like they also represent the level of achievement gained in 3 successive root races, right? With the Lemurian root race indicated by the circle with the point in the center, the Atlantean by this symbol with, the circle with the diameter, and then finally the final stages of the Aryan root race represented by the cross within the circle. But obviously, this doesn't mean that everybody born in, for instance, the Aryan root race currently has all their chakras represented by this level of activity. Obviously, the chakras that are most active, for instance, the solar plexus, is going to have a different level of activity than those chakras which are yet fully activated, such as the heart or the head center. So I think we have kind of 2 things going on at once here. One being the system as it applies to the root races overall, but then a whole other way of looking at the symbols as they apply to each of the 7 chakras, and that within a given person's chakra development, you could have all stages, being, happening at the same time. So, he combines these 2 systems, and yet as one, but I think in fact they're really two different ways of looking at the chakras. Okay. Next. He is conscious of two activities within himself, symbolized by the rotating wheel and the inner rotating cross. He is sensing the spiritual, though actively functioning in the personal life. So since rotation of the wheel occurs long before the cross appears, it seems to me that the wheel probably represents the personality aspect and the cross, the impress of the soul, which in turn allows for the, quote, sensing of the spiritual life. And finally, and the development has reached a point wherein he is nearing the probationary path. So this phrase specifically links this point of chakric activity with a specific stage of evolution. We don't often get that. And so this acts as a way of linking the two systems, where we are on the path and chakric activity. So I think it's important in that sense that you are, you've reached your, at that level of the probationary path, when you are demonstrating this level of chakric activity of the circle with the cross. But again, you have to ask which chakras are, demonstrating that activity. He doesn't go into that. He just, it's a very general discussion at this point. Okay, next up, can we get a reader, please?
Joe, you want to read?
Sure. The swastika. At this stage, the center becomes fourth dimensional. The inner rotating cross begins to turn upon its axis and to drive the flaming periphery to all sides, so that the center is better described as a sphere of fire than as a wheel. It marks the stage of the path in its two divisions, for the process of producing the effect described covers the whole period of the path. At the close, the centers are seen as globes of radiant fire, with the spokes of the wheel for the evolution of the cross from the point in the center, emerging and blending into a fire that burneth up the whole.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, first, the swastika. At this stage, the center becomes fourth dimensional. Interesting. Not the whole. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, the center becomes fourth dimensional. The inner rotating cross begins to turn upon its axis and to drive the flaming periphery to all sides, so that the center is better described as a sphere of fire than as a wheel. A chakra changes from a disc to a sphere when it becomes a wheel turning upon itself, here described as turning upon its axis. This almost certainly being its vertical axis, so as to align with the chakras above and below. DK pinpoints this stage when a center becomes fourth dimensional a little later in TCF. Quote, when Kundalini has blended with the pranic fire, the centers become three-dimensional. When it blends with mind or solar fire, and the two fires are perfectly united, the centers become fourth dimensional. When it blends with the electric fire of pure spirit after the third initiation, they take on two more dimensions. We might speculate that fourth dimensionality has to do with time, the distortion of which allows a wheel to turn upon itself, Fifth dimensionality might have to do with a change in the nature of space, though this is, of course, pure speculation. Or it could be that space and time working together change in one way at the fourth dimension and at another way in the fifth dimension. DK doesn't give teachings on the nature of fourth dimensionality. He mentions when it happens, in different contexts, but he never actually tries to explain its nature or how it appears to our consciousness. So, okay, next. The swastika, marks the stage of the path in its two divisions for the process of producing the effect described covers the whole period of the path. So, before when we were talking about the cross within the circle and that dual rotation, he describes the idea of the personality life and of the soul influence. And, from that, we hypothesize that the disc rotation represented the personality and the cross rotation represented the soul influence. So here he says, the swastika marks the stage of the path in its two divisions. And I think those are the two divisions. And it's, that which had to do with the personality development and that which results from soul contact and beyond, so, starting with discipleship and moving into the initiate level of consciousness. So let's take a look at what MDR has to say on this passage. It's specifically this passage about the two divisions. Could we get a reader, please?
Kirsten, do you want to read?
Yes. One way to look at the division of the path is the following. 1. The stage of the lunar planetary initiations, and 2. The stage of the solar initiations. Another way of understanding the path in 2 stages is 1. The path of probation from the later stages of fifth petal development up to the first initiation. 2. From the first initiation to mastership. From this perspective, the swastika symbolizes the process undergone through the first 5 initiations. What is here described looks like it occurs after the 3rd degree, culminating at the 4th.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay. So finally, at the close, the centers are seen as globes of radiant fire with the spokes of the wheel, or the evolution of the cross from the point in the center, merging and blending into a, quote, fire that burneth up the whole, unquote. This passage correlates the development of the spokes of the wheel, also described as petals of a lotus, and the evolution of the cross, which begins as a point in the center of the circle, becomes the diameter, then the cross, and finally the swastika. The fire that burneth up the whole references first the burning away of etheric webs that form a protective barrier between the centers until the time of the 4th initiation, and second, the shattering and subsequent dissipation of the causal body. Okay, next up, can we get a reader? You guys are pretty quiet today. If you have any thoughts or questions, just jump in there.
Carol, but I actually had a question before I wanted to read. I'm newish, so I only come from this from a healer perspective. I'm concerned. So at one point, I guess you're so far along on your progression, you don't need the etheric webs to protect the chakra. Is that what they're saying?
Yeah, it really has to do with your personal radiation. When you are radiatory rather than receptive to the energy fields, it's then safe for these protective webs to be burned away because nothing can resist your outward radiation. Um, and but as long as you're still able to draw influence in through the chakras, it can be incredibly dangerous to prematurely burn these protective webs away, which certain practices, breathing exercise, etc., can do, because then all kinds of stuff, elemental, um, can flood in and really poison your system. DK says this is literally a fate worse than death because it can take many incarnations to heal this breach, you could say, of of these protective webs.
Yeah, healers work on them, and people are ruining them with drugs. That's what we know of from our end.
Say that again.
Healers work on them, like pranic healers work on them. We sew them back up, and drugs is what's really ruining a lot of them. People go out and do any
Yes.
of those sort of drugs, and it rips them, and that's why they had a bad trip. But you can't convince them. But that's the
Yeah.
main reason to stay away from it.
Yes, indeed. I totally agree with you. In much earlier life, had some of that experience myself. And that's exactly what it feels like, that you've opened the door for stuff you can't control and are not at all ready to deal with, And I think there's some natural health, self-healing in just being sober, that there's some of that healing can take place. But if there's sort of a consistent, continued abuse, you can really mess yourself up. Anyway,
Well, pranic healers, just so they know, the pranic healers can, and I don't know if it lasts into the next incarnation, pranic healers can rebuild the net.
that's
That's
fantastic. That's
so I don't know if they
fantastic.
have to keep doing it because it's something we normally check. So I wanted to ask one other question. So I saw that there's the pranic fire, the solar fire, the
I'm
elect.
sorry, you're weaving it out suddenly. Maybe you could either
I'm
come.
right at the front here too, so it
Oh,
must be my mic. So the fires are the pranic, solar, electronic. Is Kundalini a fire too?
oh, sure. It's the latent fire of matter that is in the Muladhara, the root chakra, and that it meets and eventually merges with the pranic fires, and uh, that indicates a certain level of what he said. You get a three-dimensional motion at that point, and it represents a certain stage of evolution, not an initiate stage, but my guess it would be a stage of integration of your sheaths, of your vehicles, is represented by that particular merging. And then later, those two as one merge with the mental fires. And that really is an initiate stage of consciousness, because at that point you get fourth dimensional motion.
No, not so you don't have to explain too much. Is there more than the four major fires? Or is
Uh,
that
well, see, these all have to do with the form aspect. And
okay?
once the fourth initiation is taken, you're free of the whole system. There is no more Kundalini, And so it's just those four that are influential in taking you up to that point.
Good. Okay. I'll read now.
Okay.
And I hope I've got my system up as
That's
loud
good.
as it goes.
It
And I
sounds good now.
does it? Oh, good. It's got my face almost into it. And I
well,
sometimes find some things are blocking the vision. That's why I picked a page on the right. There's things I can't get rid of that it says talking Carol. So it puts blocks, little boxes on my screen. It blocks some of the reading. A brief sentence has its place here owing to its relation to the subject. Another sentence is also added here, which, if mediated upon, will prove of real value and will have a definite effect upon one of the centers. Which center it is for the student himself to find out. These two sentences are as follows. The secret of the fire lies hid in the second letter of the sacred word. The mystery of life is concealed within the heart. When the lower point vibrates, when the sacred triangle glows, when the point, the middle center, and the apex likewise burn, then the two triangles, the greater and the lesser, merge with the one flame which burneth up the whole.
thank you. It's if meditated upon up here. Okay. So first, a brief sentence has its place here owing to its relation to this subject. This quote unquote brief sentence is actually the first stanza of the stanzas of Zahn, found on page 11 of A Treatise on Cosmic Fire, which states, as was just read, the secret of the fire lies hid in the second letter of the sacred word. The mystery of life is concealed within the heart. When the lower point vibrates, when the sacred triangle glows, when the point, the middle center, and the apex likewise burn, then the two triangles, the greater and the lesser, merge with one flame, which burneth up the whole. Okay, this is a key stanza. Even though DK doesn't offer a detailed analysis, he does point out the importance of the stanza in the closing pages of A Treatise on Cosmic Fire. Could we get a reader for this?
Yeah, hey Magda, do you want to read?
All that it will be possible for us to do in this section will be to impart the truth in three ways. Through in the illumination of the student's mind as he studies the stanzas of Xian, which will be found at the commencement of the treatise. Secondly, through the realization that will come to the student as he correlates and ponders upon the various occult fragments found scattered through the pages, primarily centering his attention upon the following words. The
And then
secret...
he gives then the first stanza. I cut it off because we had just read it. Go ahead.
Thirdly, through the consideration of the various charts and word pictures which will be found also scattered through the treatise. The student of the new era will approach much that he has to master through the medium of the eye, learning thereby to appreciate and solve that which is presented to him in the form of lines and diagrams. All is symbol, and these symbols must be mastered.
So right here at the very end of the book, he's suggesting the importance of this other way of considering the material. It suggests the means by which one accesses higher mind, through the illumination of the student's mind. He recommends the stanzas of Zahn, the bits and pieces of occult commentary, which are scattered throughout all the books, and then the charts and pictures that are given, again, many, many, many throughout the books. And this seems to be like a parallel form that we use in order to stimulate our intuition. Okay, so first up, we have the first stanza. So let's take a closer look. First, the secret of the fire lies hidden in the second letter of the sacred word. First of all, I just want to find out if you have worked with these stanzas, or at least are familiar with them, outside of, just coming upon them now in line with the text. But if you've looked at these stanzas on your own before, raise your hand or somehow let me know, because I'm interested in knowing just how impactful these stanzas are, or if people don't tend to separate them out and look at them. Has anybody considered these stanzas on their own? Yes, Joe, Mira, anybody else? Yeah. Okay. Looks like also Sri Yantra Shanti. Yes, thank you. Okay. Yeah, they're extraordinary, and purposefully not obvious and transparent, but there's a quality to these stanzas that you can almost feel it stimulating your intuition. It's a whole different kind of approach, you could say. Okay, so first, the secret of the fire lies hid in the second letter of the sacred word. Though we can't say for certain, and you can never say for certain when you're trying to figure out these stanzas, the most likely candidate for the sacred word is AUM, Om, as we discover in this passage from Initiation, Human and Solar. Can we get a reader, please?
Maria.
Yes, I'd love to.
Thank you.
It is of interest to the student to realize that just as at each initiation some word of power is committed to the initiate, so similarly to the Logos was committed the great word of power, which produced our solar system. That word, which is called the sacred word, or AUM. It must be here remembered that this sound, AUM, is man's endeavor to reproduce on an infinitesimally small scale the cosmic triple sound whereby creation was made possible. The words of power of all degrees have a triple sequence.
So, he calls it the sacred word here, and he calls it now in the text that we're reading, verse the secret of the word, let's say it in the second letter of the sacred word. So that's one tie-in. And the other is he tells us that the words of power of all degrees, you could also say of all types, have a triple sequence. And so from that, and I think the template for that triple sequence is always the AUM, even though the differentiations of that threefold sequence can vary, and varies a lot, in fact. A bit later, in Initiation, Human and Solar, DK describes the three letters of the AUM. Can we get a reader for this, please?
Carol, I'll volunteer. 3 words committed by the solar logos to each of the 3 logi as follows. A, the sacred sound A to Shiva, he who embodies the spirit or will aspect. It is the word through which God the Father works. B, the sound U to Vishnu, God the Son. He is the form builder and provides the body which the spirit must occupy, thereby making divine incarnation possible. A is the life sound, U is the form sound, and the sound M to Brahma, who his work of energy provider links in active intelligence, spirit and form, or the self and not self. Initiation, human and solar 153.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we're on, pretty solid ground. If we identify the second letter of the sacred word as the U, representing the second or soul principle. Interestingly, the number for U is 21, suggesting a union of the first and second principles. This union, as it applies to the human kingdom, is described on the next page of initiation, human and solar. Could we get a reader?
Miri.
In the fourth kingdom, the AM tone is dying down, and the two notes sounding for are the U and the A. In the fifth kingdom, the M has subsided into distant undertone. The U is blended with it so as to be indistinguishable, and the A or Shiva note is spilling forth in power and is practically the one note heard.
Okay, so you see, you think, oh, well, the this idea that the U is the 21st letter is kind of random. But we see in this that it really does represent the nature of this U position of this second aspect, where both the first and second aspect are the two notes sounded forth are the U and the A. So that is the 2 and the 1 of 21. In our last couple of sessions where we looked at the numerological meaning of Shambhala, you may remember how specific DK got in terms of the nature of number and its relation to the meaning of number that we usually associate either with the principles or the rays, or the kingdoms, etc. Okay. The numbers associated with AUM, 1, 3, and 4, directly represent the three aspects of a human being: the monad, the triad, and the lower quaternary. So it's no accident that you have these numerological associations, and a lot can be learned from them. Okay, back to the stanza. Since fire is associated with the first aspect, secret of the fire, we might hypothesize that the secret of the fire is the secret of life itself. We get more insight on the relation of the secret of the fire to the second letter of the sacred word in the first two sentences of stanza 11. Quote, "The great triangles and their just arrangement hold hid the secret of the wheel of life. The cosmic fire radiates as directed from the second sphere, controlled by the ruler of the merging ray." It's much longer than this, but I'm just pulling that out. The merging ray is the second ray, so we might hypothesize that the ruler of the second ray directs the fire of life, the spark or flame of the indwelling jiva, into an appropriate form. Thus it is that the, quote, secret of the fire lies hid in the form represented by the U, the second letter. Next, the mystery of life is concealed within the heart. To my mind, this is a parallel statement to the first, which relates the mystery of life, with the secret of the fire, and the heart with the second letter of the sacred word. So they sort of illuminate, these sentences illuminate each other. As suggested by the number 21, the heart, represented by the second principle, conceals the life aspect, just as the heart of the egoic lotus conceals the influence of the monad. Another way to illustrate this idea is to associate the three elements of the Vesica Pisces with the AUM. The Vesica, or central part, created by the overlapping circles of spirit and matter, then become the vessel, suggested by the letter U. And the concealed inner spark manifests as the sun, who conceals the father aspect or mystery of life within his outer form. As revealed by the Christ statement, I and my Father are one. Indeed, Christ's identification with the heart is well known. Any thoughts or questions? Okay. Next, when the lower point vibrates. So this is the first of 4 statements describing a series of progressive stages, which culminates in liberation. We might ask, do these stages lead to a specific liberation, or is the stanza a template for a process that can occur at many different levels? I'm inclined towards the latter hypothesis. Representing these 4 stages are a number of elements that we'll have to identify in order to further penetrate into the meaning of this progression. We're going to have to figure out what these are referring to in order to understand at least one application of this stanza. It's pretty clear that these 6 elements represent progressively higher levels, with the final quote unquote whole representing all the elements combined. Given the fact that stanza 1 is reprinted in this section on the chakras, let's start by applying the elements given in this stanza to the centers. After all, DK does say a brief sentence has its place here owing to its relation to this subject. So, at least in this application, he's not going to be talking about cosmic planes, right? With this first stanza, it would seem that, it's a very strong hint that he's giving this stanza to us right now after this section on the centers, because it relates to that progression of liberation through the rising of the Kundalini. So when applying this stanza to the centers, there's little doubt that the vibrating lower point is the Muladhara, or base of the spine center. In this application, applying it to the centers, I think we're safe in that assumption. DK corroborates this later in TCF when he tells us that this center, quote, vibrates, right? Owing to its, that it vibrates to the measure of Kundalini in its many forms in demonstrations. So, the verb directly connects when the lower point vibrates. Okay, next up, when the sacred triangle glows, we might hypothesize that this represents a response from the spiritual triad, which has its lower counterparts and receptive points in the head, heart, and throat chakras of the initiate. That's how we receive impress from the triad. As we discover in this passage, could we get a reader for this, please? Just this little middle part.
see.
We're all volunteering.
Go ahead.
Okay.
The center found at the throat, the most important from the standpoint of the mental plane. That in the region of the heart, which has an occult link with the Buddhic plane. That above the top of the head, which is the crown and has relation with the atomic plane. TCF 165. I have one question, because I came in way late on these things. Is the two triangles the triangles of one triangle being the upper chakra and the other triangles being the lower chakras?
Well, that's what we're pursuing right now. That's what we're unraveling. So
Thank you.
the, you know, uh, the, the first one we have that he mentions is the sacred triangle, which we're identifying. And of course, all of this is hypothetical to the triad and its impress on the head, heart, and throat centers, right? DK says at one point that the three chakras that are outposts of the monad are these three, the head, heart, and throat, because they represent the three aspects. Okay. So I'm thinking that the when the sacred triangle glows means that when this process is initiated on high by the by the triad, and that it is received through these three centers. Okay. Okay. Okay, next, all right, can we get a reader? Hang on a sec. Find my place here. So Rays and Initiations describes this triadal response in a section on building the Antakarana, one of the most important sections in that book. Can we get a reader, please, for this?
And
It's all about
Veronica.
triadic response.
Yeah, and Veronica, are you there?
Did we lose that, Veronica?
Janet, you have a question or you want to read?
I'll go ahead and read if Anna's not available.
Okay.
Go ahead.
The result is that his developed potency and its radius of influence are now sufficiently strong to call out a response from the spiritual triad. There is then a going forth towards aspect of the Antakarana constructed by the disciple, along with the life of the soul and body can travel. The father monad, working through the thread, now goes forth to meet the son, the soul, enriched by the experience of the personality life in the three worlds. And from the higher levels, a line of responsive projection of energy is sent forth, which will eventually make contact with the lower projection. Thus, the Anakarana is built. The tension of the lower evokes the tension of the higher.
Thank you. So this first sentence, we could translate as being when the lower point vibrates. The result is that his developed potency and its radius of influence are now sufficiently strong to call out a response from the spiritual triad. You see how that can almost directly be translated as, let me go back to it, when the lower point vibrates, when the sacred triangle glows. See. Okay. So next up. So those are the two preconditions, right? The lower points vibrating. In other words, the disciple has made him or herself ready for the experience, which then invokes a response from the sacred triangle, which we've somewhat established as the triad. And next we have when the point, the middle center, and the apex likewise burn. So applying the stanza to the chakras, this might represent the base of the spine, the heart, and the head centers, which brings to mind the energy system illustrated in the Windham Hill crop circle, with its graphic emphasis on the middle center. Alternately, these 3 points could represent the throat, heart, and head centers, thus having a direct correlation to the spiritual triad. In both cases, the 3 principles are represented. The first, second, and third aspects are present in both those sets of chakras. And then finally, then the 2 triangles, the greater and the lesser, merge with one flame, which burneth up the whole. In the framework of the raising of the Kundalini, leading to the 4th initiation, which has been the subject of the text just before the citing of this stanza, this phrase might be suggesting that the lesser triangle is the mental, astral, and physical vehicles, and the greater triangle, the 3 aspects of the soul vehicles, which are sequentially contacted during the first 3 initiations via a sequential stimulation of the throat, the heart, and the head centers. The one flame is the descending flame of spirit originating in the monad, channeled by the ego, which shatters the causal body and ushers the newly liberated jiva onto the Buddhic plane. So any thoughts or questions? Any alternative interpretations to this? Using the idea as above, so below, it seems to me that stanza 1 could also be used as a template for the process leading to the 6th initiation, with the point, the middle center, and the apex, in this case, representing Atma Buddhi Manas, or the Atma Buddhi Manasic permanent atoms, resolving into the one flame of the monad. In fact, we might hypothesize that any energetic system, human, planetary, even solar, demonstrating ascension through its 3 principles, could use this stanza as a template. Nevertheless, given its placement in the text, I immediately following the section on the chakras, I think DK intends that the reader apply this stanza to a stimulation of the chakras through the raising of the Kundalini. I think that's the reading that we're supposed to apply at this time. Maybe later in the text, it could, just like the symbols. Remember those 5 symbols? We first of all applied them to the sphere that represents the form aspect, right? And now we're applying those same 5 symbols to the Kundalini's progressive unfoldment or activity. And, could very well be that stanza 1 could be applied at many different levels. All righty then. Next up, the second old commentary cited by DK. Could we get a reader, please?
Gordon, you want to read?
The fire within the lesser fire findeth its progress much impelled when the circle of the moving and the unmoving of the lesser wheel within the greater wheel that moveth not in time findeth a twofold outlet. It then shineth with the glory of the twofold one and his sixfold brother. Kohat rusheth through space. He searcheth for his complement. the breath of the unmoving one and the fire of the one who see the whole from the beginning rush to meet each other, and the unmoving becomes the sphere of activity.
Thank you. Okay, so to my mind, this is a much more complicated old commentary. It's not a stanza. And so we don't know exactly where it comes from. Of course, we don't really know where any of these come from, but it certainly is of the same, you could say, stature as the first stanza. And, you know, he's giving it to us here, literally one after the other, because, you know, as we learned here, you know, we'll take any clue we can get, right? And so he says here, another sentence is also added here, which, if meditated upon, will prove of real value and will have a definite effect upon one of the centers. Which center it is for the student himself to find out. It's very cryptic. And so we'll see if we can remind me, and we'll see if we can identify the center, which even pondering this stanza can influence. So again, let's take a closer look. First of all, the fire within the lesser fire findeth its progress much impelled. To me, the phrase findeth its progress much impelled suggests that the inner fire is directing the unfoldment of the lesser fire. This directing fire is possibly the spark of the indwelling jiva, which has its source in the pure flame of the monad. You know, it's to separate itself in its purest form, right? That spark at the center of our being that we're gradually learning to become conscious of. So it seems like a good candidate to me for being the fire within the lesser fire, right? It is this inner flame that invisibly animates the lesser fires, the latent and pranic fires of the centers. For the Kundalini must be stimulated into activity by the expanding consciousness of the indwelling jiva, the quote, fire within the lesser fire. You know, the Kundalini isn't just going to rise on its own. These centers have to be stimulated through the consciousness of the indwelling jiva. I'm thinking that's the fire within the lesser fire. Next, we have a description of the two wheels. Quote, the circle of the moving and the unmoving, of the lesser wheel within the greater wheel that moveth not in time. Since DK has placed this stanza just after a description of the stages unfoldment of the centers, I think it's probable that, as in the case of stanza 1, this old commentary addresses this unfoldment. So, in this context, what are these two circles or wheels? The lesser within the greater. Anybody have any ideas? What could the lesser wheel be? Yes, Joe.
There's a statement that the like the third eats the second, the fourth eats the third. You can help me with that, but that's the sense I'm getting. And let me apply this to what I understand about astrology today, which I think we're actually experiencing right now. And that is, I mean, within the group, I'm feeling the energy. We have Pluto exceptionally active because it just moved into Aquarius. Not only that, though, we have Uranus that I think today or tomorrow is completely dead in the water. It moves very quickly. I'm saying it goes stationary to direct in this period right now. And we've got both, in my mind, rays 1 and 2 having a dance. And of course, I relate to 7. So I've got 1, 2, and 7 functioning here in a vortex that is triple, and I'm kind of nutty myself. But maybe the 1 is trying to eat the 2. You get the concept, I know.
Yeah, there's actually a one of the rules in rays and initiations. I can only paraphrase. I used to have it memorized, but it says something like the 5th feeds on the 4th.
That's it.
And the idea being that that the consciousness, the personality consciousness, actually is food for the soul. That is, the relationship is that it draws the personality aspect up into itself, which is one way of describing that is to eat or feed on that. So that's interesting. And that is what I think is a good description of what's going on here.
The idea, if we go back to Kundalini again and to the chakras, is that there's a rotation that occurs from the upper to the lower to the upper to the lower. It just keeps going in a big circle. Evocation, invocation, for example. And it feels as if everything is in motion right now.
Mm. Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. So when applying this stanza to the human system, one possibility is that the lesser wheel represents the ego and its 3 vehicles, which works out its activities within the greater wheel of the monad. Moving and unmoving are relative terms. From the perspective of the absolute unmanifest, all creation is moving. But when we look at moving and unmoving in human terms, the wheel of the monad is, at least when compared to the activity of the ego and the personality that it cyclically sends forth, is relatively unmoving. So this is because it represents the life aspect, which, quote, moveth not in time, since it doesn't directly participate in the world of form, but only does so through that wheel within itself, which is the wheel of ego and personality. The ego, which then is the ruler of the personality. So I think that's a good candidate for these 2 wheels. Okay, next. The lesser wheel within the greater wheel that moveth not in time findeth a 2-fold outlet. So we learned about this 2-fold outlet in the phase of chakric activity, symbolized by the circle divided into 4. In that section, DK tells us, quote, he is conscious of 2 activities within himself, symbolized by the rotating wheel and the inner rotating cross. He is sensing the spiritual, though actively functioning in the personal life. So could this double functioning be the 2-fold outlet described in this old commentary? The soul is often described as sending a beam upward towards the monad and downward into the personality vehicle. As we become soul infused, it seems likely that we begin to mirror this dual activity represented by the circle and the cross. Okay. Okay, and next, It then shineth with the glory of the twofold one and of his sixfold brother. The head center, which DK tells us back on page 168, is twofold, shines with glory when the Kundalini fires are blended with the fires of spirit. It then becomes, quote, the gorgeous center, surmounting and enveloping them all. Okay, so that's a good candidate for that part of the old commentary. The term his sixfold brother is to me the most difficult phrase in this old commentary to interpret. It may refer to the group of chakras in the head, which is the higher reflection of the chakras of the spine. In this case, this group would be sixfold because the crown chakra forms the seventh, which is actually the first, and as such both synthesizes and demonstrates through its quote-unquote sixfold brother. At first, it seemed far-fetched to me. I mean, would really the chakras being the sixfold brother? But in support of this idea, we can turn to how the planets are synthesized. And remember, the planets are chakras in the solar logos. So in this scenario, the 7 sacred planets called brothers in the ageless wisdom make up the chakras of the solar logos. We might imagine that just like when the head center of a human being, when the last synthesizing planet, Uranus, is about to merge with the sun, he might refer to the other 6, now synthesized sacred planets, as his sixfold brother. On an even higher turn of the spiral, our solar system is the heart chakra of a logos of 7 solar systems, of which ours is one. When that great system begins to unify, 6 of these solar systems would come together, thus becoming the sixfold brother, before finally synthesizing with the solar system that represents the head center of that great cosmic entity. But, I have to admit, this is the most speculative of all the interpretations. There's only 2 references to the term sixfold in all the DK books. So it's quite difficult to determine just what this might mean. I think the most likely is the idea of the final synthesizing chakra. Okay, next, it gets easier. Yes, Janet.
I guess there's been a couple of comments in the chat. Would you like me to read them to you?
I'll open it up and I'll read them.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for letting me know that. Okay.
Sure.
I should actually be staying on top of that. Okay, could sixfold brother relate to the multi-bodies of man? I'm just saying, let's take them one at a time here. Let's start with that. Okay, going back up here. It then shineth with the glory of the twofold one, which is the head center. We determined that, and of his sixfold brother. Yes, it could. You would have then all of the sheaths active, from lowest to highest, and that so it could represent all the lesser sheaths. The only problem with that interpretation, as I see it, is that by the time you would reach that stage of development, you would have transcended the lowest 3 sheaths altogether. You would have, at the 4th initiation, passed on to the Buddhic plane, and then basically you become a 4-fold one. So it would be the 2-fold one and his 3-fold brother, which would mean Atma Buddhi Manas and the monad or the head center. But, it's totally a possible, I did consider it. It's a possible interpretations, and I appreciate you thinking on this. Okay, and another one from Magda, the two wheels, the less one moving and the higher one staying still, if I understood correctly, remind me of the Dendera zodiac. Outside there's the stillness of no time and space. Inside there's the movement proper of the dense worlds. Yeah, this is another, the Dendera zodiac represents, or at least there are esoteric scholars that believe that it represents the precession of the equinoxes, or that's indicated in the Dendera zodiac. And there you also have two wheels. Definitely you have two wheels. The reason I didn't go for it is just simply that it's not part of the constitution of the initiate and of the chakra systems, but it would definitely fit as being a wheel within another, because you would have the lesser wheel being the a sign, the period of one sign in a zodiac, which, for instance, we're coming into the sign of Aquarius, which will last about 2,500 years within a greater zodiac of 12 times 2,500 years, right? But then there's an even greater zodiac that precession of the equinoxes sits within, which lasts 300,000 years. And so you have to, that's another strong possibility for a lesser wheel within a greater. But the thing is, even the greater is moving. It moves in direct connection with the lesser wheel, but it would seem to be unmoving. But again, you don't have that as a part of the chakra system of a human being. And that's, I was trying to hold this interpretation within those confines. So real good ideas. Thank you. Yes, Joe.
One other thought is that the sixfold brother, because I've been dealing with the cube lately, that's what comes to mind. The cube as six-sided.
I like that. I like that because it represents the entire form aspect. And then the twofold one could represent the highest point, the monad, and the dropped point. We know the head center is twofold. That's one interpretation. But if you could also look at the idea of the Om Mani Padme Hum, the point in the center of the lotus, of the egoic lotus, and the monad on his own plane, and then the sixfold brother as the form aspect. I think that's a good candidate. Thank you, Joe.
And it works basically all the way from the probationary all the way to, as far as I can see, it goes into even the third and fourth levels, and it must go on to the fifth and sixth.
Well, really, I think both these stanzas are oriented to up to and through the fourth. And then, that's what they're describing. And this sixfold one or sixfold brother to the higher certainly is present through that entire period. So I think that's a good candidate. I would hold that certainly an equal possibility to the idea of the one chakra and the six chakras. Yeah, let's see. We got another chat in the meantime. Well, could the two wheels relate to globes and chains? Yes, of course. If you're just looking for a lesser wheel inside a greater, absolutely, you could do that. Again, it's just a question of relevance to the material at hand. And I think in this interpretation of the first stanza and this whole commentary, I think it's going to have to do with the chakras, chakric development of a human being. But if the globes, for instance, are the chakras of a chain, right? And if you lift the whole thing to that level, then it would be very easy to, make the globes the lesser wheel and the chain the greater wheel, certainly. And it definitely is not other than what we're talking about. It relates, but it's on that cosmic level of planetary unfoldment rather than human unfoldment. Okay. Next up. By the way, don't feel like you have to put it in the chat. You can also just speak out. Either way is fine. I'm just glad you're participating. Okay, next, Fohat rusheth through space. He searches for its complement. This is quite a bit easier. DK gives us a definition of Fohat earlier in this book. Quote, Akasha, in manifestation, expresses itself as Fohat, or divine energy, and Fohat on the different planes is known as ether, air, fire, water, electricity, ether, prana, and similar terms. It is the sum total of that which is active, animated, or vitalized, and of all that concerns itself with the adaptation of the form to the needs of the inner flame of life. So that's a refresher on Fohat. And now we have, so Fohat is intelligent activity, which, like physical plane activity, has a plus and a minus charge. When the personality becomes one with the soul, the positive pole of the monad seeks to merge with the negative pole of the now soul-infused personality. Thus, at the behest of the monad, quote, Fohat rusheth through space, he searcheth for his complement. Next, the breath of the unmoving one and the fire of the one who seeth the whole from the beginning rush to meet each other. The breath is a symbol for directed fiery energy, working with the hypothesis that the unmoving one is the monad. One possibility for the identity of the one who seeth the whole from the beginning is the solar angel who is in the beginning, sent into the lower quaternary by the monad to preside over eons of cycles of personality life. But on its own plane, its innate, highly developed consciousness allows this solar angel to, quote, seeth the whole from the beginning, to see the entire eons long cycle of unfoldment from beginning to end. And a tip of the hat to Michael on this, because his notes reflected this idea as well. And finally, the unmoving becomes the sphere of activity. So in this final stage, the angel of the presence is subsumed in the presence itself. And the monadic sphere becomes the goal of endeavor for the returning pilgrim, now a master of wisdom, seeking reunion with the monad. Hence, the unmoving becomes the sphere of activity. Okay, I think this phrase really helps us to bring it into the unmoving circle, into the human realm. It's a real clue as to the identity of the greater wheel that moveth not. Okay, any thoughts or questions on this old commentary? This can be an acquired taste. You have to have a lot of patience. You also have to have a lot of respect for the possibilities that these old commentaries hold and can reveal. If seen from the, the point of view of how we normally deal with material here, it may seem like we spent an inordinately long amount of time on these two old commentaries, but I think they deserve that kind of attention because, first of all, DK tells us that they're very important and that they definitely stimulate the intuition. So I hope you're with me on that. We don't have a whole lot of old commentary as we go through, but once in a while he'll insert a piece of old commentary, and when he does, we'll do our best to try to figure out what he's talking about. Okay, let's see what we have in the chat world here. Okay, good. All right. Of course, all these observations are hypothetical. But even if wrong in certain particulars, it seems to me at least a possible, maybe even plausible analysis of both these old commentaries when applied to the return journey of a human being and to the nature of the unfoldment of the centers. Okay, how are we doing on time? We are finished. So good cutoff place. We'll start right here next time.